Hi everyone, I am JMotta. I'm postdoctoral fellow at the Cameroon School of Mines, working on the NL4D project, which is a consortium sponsored by Anglo American, with current working groups at University of Leicester, Cameroon School of Mines, and Cardiff University. I'll talk to you today about how to use K-means partitioning on exploration data to geochemistry precisely to the main samples of platinum group element ore and host rocks in the central northern limb of the Bushveld Complex. So we are talking about here using machine learning in geosciences/exploration. So under the domain expert lens, you get data and you use your knowledge to understand the data based on what you know about the laws that constrain that setting. Under the machine learning lens, you get the data and you try to find features or associations between features on your data, and then you will explore hypotheses that might be able to explain the phenomena you're modeling. In exploration, it might be useful to learn from data using machine learning algorithms, especially clustering algorithms, so you can get recommendations on what are the important things in your data, and so you can understand the data structure, discover the data structure, and reduce the dimensionality of your dataset. So the K-means partitioning algorithm is kind of very well established in the literature. Is substantially old now, first proposition at 1975, and partitioning is different from clustering, and I try to tell you guys the difference quickly now. So partitioning is getting something and dividing it into a precise number of fragments that you already know what they are. So in this case it's quite straightforward, right? We get 5 clouds of points for these two features. But when you get into more complex data, especially real-world data, things might be really difficult to partition, and it's quite difficult for you to have a good guess on how many groups you have for those data, okay, for these data. So what we do in general, like for this very first example in here, is that we take a look at the data and we try to see how they behave as points that connect to a center region called centroids. And the K-means partitioning algorithm will seed several centroids in random positions, measure distance from the centroids to the point clouds, and see which centroids have the best fit as a center towards the points around it. It will start with the precise number of centroids that you specify. That means the number of clusters that you think are suitable to divide those data, to partition the data. Okay? So how do you say that something is well partitioned or not? Use different metrics, different scores that we will count either from differences within the clusters and across the clusters. There are many of them around there. So in this case, that you can see on the top right here, we are seeding different centroids that might be suitably positioned to represent a cluster. And you can do this in as many dimensions as you want. So the northern limb of the Bushveld Complex is a segment of a major intrusion that formed from 2060 to 2050 million years ago. Several limbs of this magmatic intrusion of regional scale are now observed across southern Africa. And the northern limb is particularly important because it has a very important structural component associated to it. And as you can see on this map, there are several main structural corridors that dissect the magmatic stratigraphy that has been regionally divided for studies and for exploration purposes across different farms. Farms meaning geographical regions. Okay. The stratigraphy of the northern limb is relatively well understood at the moment and is compared in general to the remainder of the Bushveld Complex. Okay, the four main magmatic parts of the magmatic sequence are the lower zone, the critical zone, the main zone, and the upper zone. They are mostly rocks that comply with ultramafic to mafic ultramafic chemical attributes. Main lithotypes change from pyroxenites, mostly orthoperoxenites, Harzburgite, gabbronorites, gabbros, and olivine gabbros. There is a whole suite of magmatic mafic and ultramafic rocks on them, with some subsidiary lithotypes, including chromatites, massive sulfides, and a whole lot of possibilities within the mafic ultramafic spectrum. Most importantly, the critical zone hosts substantial Pge deposits. And the Pge deposits, they vary across the northern limb as two main types, so to speak. I won't really go into the details now because that's far away from the spectrum of this talk, but deposits across different farms are mostly divided across base metal sulfides that are in general disseminated. It can be very rarely be massive sulfides, but they also occur in chromatites as well. And these rocks are hosted, like I said before, in mafic ultramafic rocks in general, but there are some differences between the base metal sulfide deposits and the chromatite hosted deposits. There are substantial changes on the footwall across the farms, from chemical sediments and siliciclastic sediments, felsic magmatic rocks and gneisses, and some areas that have specifically just felsic rocks as footwall. And the host rock chemistry, of course, is mafic ultramafic in general. Okay, I won't really go in details about the differences across the Pge deposit because it doesn't really matter for the case that we will be working on. So the data set I will show you guys details and results today is a data set of cobalt and nickel in ppm, titanium and chromium oxide that have been determined by X-ray fluorescence, platinum, palladium and gold assay results determined by fire assay over 3,005 samples over 17 drill holes on these four farms here in the central part of the northern limb. And as you can see here on this simplified screenshot, they distribute mostly from north to south, with main clusters on the Sandsloot farm and along the boundary from the Drenth to Overijssel farms. So, like I said before, for the K-means, you need to start with a number of clusters to partition your dataset. Okay, so originally we got data from legacy exploration results that Anglo American had, and we had a substantial part of work associated with cleaning this dataset in terms of what can be actually seen in a 3D environment. Say you have enough and precise and good standing information on how to show them in 3D space, and then some consistency and integrity checks regarding the geochemical data itself, whether they are good standing, if they are not really extreme outliers, and if there is any sort of inconsistency, technical inconsistency associated with this data. Then the data is transformed using center log ratio and is scaled with a min-max scaler. These data are now clean, and then we run experiments to determine the number of clusters that can be used to partition the data set. Okay, And these data sets and the final number as determined from the experiments will be used to create the final groupings on the data set. So we tried several number of potential clusters from 2 to 31, and these numbers comprise the possible numbers of partitions associated with the stratigraphy, number of R levels, and lithology types. We follow the heuristic that every experiment with a definite number of clusters has been scored following 3 different metrics that tell us how the clusters, how significant are these clusters, both at within cluster level and across cluster level. So using this rationale, it was determined that a number of 3 clusters is enough to subdivide, to partition the data set, okay? Following the rationale as I explained before, using these 3 metrics, the within cluster score, the Davis-Boudin score, and the silhouette coefficient, okay? Here are the parameters that we use to define that plus a good match. And after that, we proceed into clustering, partitioning the dataset again with the defined number of clusters, in this case 3, and proceeding interpreting the results. So now on the actual geochemical results, we can see that the 3 groups, they have different behaviors regarding the features, in this case platinum, palladium, gold, nickel, cobalt, chromium, and titanium. So regarding platinum group elements plus gold, every group has a different behavior in terms of content. There is some overlap across groups. The group 0 is overall the richest in Pg plus gold, with group 1 and group 2 bearing mostly negligible content. Nickel and cobalt, the chalcophile elements, they show considerable overlap. They're not really that distinguishable. Group 0 has the overall richest nickel content, Group 1 has the overall highest cobalt content, and Group 2 has the smallest content in general. Regarding chromium and titanium, there is considerable overlap, with some remarkable high values in chromium content in Group 1, and very high, substantially high titanium value for Group 2 with little chromium associated with it. Now observing in more detail the Pge content and the other contents across the groups. So Group 0 has higher Pge plus gold content, has a very restricted platinum/palladium range, relatively higher non-nickel and cobalt, and low chromium and titanium. So Group 1 is mildly rich in Pge plus gold, has a broad range of platinum over palladium ratios, and I'll just jump to the platinum, and Group 2 has very negligible Pge plus gold content, okay? So as you can see, they have remarkable differences. And what do we interpret from that? So I'm trying to wrap up now. So the 3 groups might represent, that's our current interpretation, 3 magmatic levels / crystallization packages within the sequence. So 2 groups are definitely OR. So Group 0 and Group 1 have enough content to be considered, Pge content to be considered OR. The differential mineralogy, with Group 0 being possibly representing base metal sulfides, meanwhile Group 1 represents chromatites with PGM, platinum group minerals. They represent different magmatic differential stages as shown by high titanium long chromium proxies. The platinum-palladium ratios is consistent with overall similar Pge speciation conditions within groups, but differ across the groups. The Group 2 is definitely not OR, that's easy to tell. And they also have interesting patterns in non-Pge features. So to speak, you don't really need the Pge content to tell that they are not OR following this rationale, and they might represent highly evolved magmatic rocks. So the next steps are to refine interpretation on geochemistry, particularly the Pge speciation, to explore these results in space to try to find patterns, and link the insights into the general evolution of the northern limb, some references, and thank you very much for taking the time to look into this talk. And here are the contacts for you to reach out if you want. Thank you very much.